This week on Jerusalem Dateline, CBN News exclusive interview with U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo.
We stand for religious freedom every place American diplomacy is at work.
And Pompeo's speech in Cairo.
We learned that when America retreats, chaos often follows. When we neglect our friends, resentment builds. And when we partner with our enemies, they advance.
Plus, Egypt dedicates the largest church in the Middle East. All this and more this week on Jerusalem Dateline. Hello and welcome to this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. I'm Chris Mitchell, coming to you this week from Cairo, Egypt, where U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo delivered a major address to tell the world the role America will play in the Middle East. He did it just before reports of U.S. troops pulling out of Syria. After his speech, Pompeo gave CBN News an exclusive interview to explain why America is back and that it's a force for good in the Middle East. We interviewed Pompeo at a newly dedicated church built by Egypt for Coptic Christians. You just had a major speech about the Middle East, and 10 years ago another major speech was given here in Cairo. Would it be fair to say that your speech was America is back and it's a force for good?
Absolutely. I want people throughout the Middle East and the world to know that America's involvement in the Middle East is absolutely a force for good. We come here with no intention to oppress or to dominate, but rather to free, to create opportunities for every individual throughout the Middle East to live their life, to have the freedoms that we are all so blessed to have in the United States.
Pompeo's speech came 10 years after then-President Obama delivered his blueprint for the Middle East in Cairo.
He told you that the United States and the Muslim world needed, quote, a new beginning, end of quote. The results of these misjudgments have been dire.
The Secretary of State said that President Obama's timid, hesitant, and apologetic policy allowed ISIS, Iran, and other terrorists to thrive.
We learned that when America retreats, chaos often follows. When we neglect our friends, resentment builds. And when we partner with our enemies, they advance.
Pompeo said that all changed as the Trump administration pushed to decimate ISIS, confront Iran, and stand up to Syria's President Assad.
The good news is this: the age of self-inflicted American shame is over, and so are the policies that produce so much needless suffering. Now comes the real new beginning.
Part of that new beginning is forging a global alliance against Iran. One of your themes of the trip is about Iran and the danger to the Middle East. Do you see nations aligning up with the United States against the influence of Iran?
So our team has done good work. We've built an enormous coalition that ranges from Asia to North Africa, certainly to the Middle East, countries from all across the world, understanding that the threat from the Islamic Republic of Iran is real and continuing and ought not to be tolerated.
Another issue is in Syria, as Turkey's President Erdogan is threatening U.S. allies. A few hours ago, you met with leaders in Erbil about the Kurds, and yet there's dangerous talk coming out of Turkey. What's your message to Erdogan if he goes ahead and invades the Kurds?
Well, our message is straightforward. The work that the Kurdish forces did with us alongside in Syria has been important. It took down a caliphate, 99% of the real estate that was held by ISIS. We remember people sitting in cages being burned. It seems like a long time ago, but frankly, it's the good work that the United States did with a big coalition. And we'll work with the Turks to make sure that there's security for them as well, and that the Kurdish people in Syria are indeed protected.
What about the Christians in the region? They have an appeal that they won't be eradicated, that Christianity won't be eradicated. What's your message to those Christians?
That America is with them. Christianity is at the heart of the history of this place here in the Middle East. All you got to do is grab a Bible and read the places and the names. Christians have been central to the Middle East. We want to make sure that they continue to have opportunities and freedom, and for Christian churches to grow alongside churches of other faiths as well. Our message is simple, is that we stand for religious freedom every place American diplomacy is at work.
Here's more of our exclusive interview with U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. Mr. Secretary, thanks for joining us on CBN News. Very much so.
It's great to be with you.
You just had a tour of this cathedral. It was given as a gift by President el-Sisi to the church. Why is this so important?
This is a very special place, just recently opened. We're sitting in the heart of Cairo, the heart of Egypt, and we have this cathedral demonstrating that every place in the world can have religious freedom, opportunity for individuals to worship in the way they see fit, and here a chance to praise the Lord in Cairo. It's a pretty special place. It's an enormous, wonderful, beautiful cathedral.
Why is religious freedom so important to the Trump administration?
Because it's at the heart of all the freedoms that every individual should have. Right? Every human being has the dignity that comes with their life, and religious freedom is a central element of that. For individuals to be able to worship in the way they want, or if they choose not to worship, so be it. To have that in this place too is so special, a place which isn't everywhere here in the Middle East. For President Sisi to have done this is really special, and I think important to Cairo, to Egypt, and to the world.
You mentioned him in your speech as well. Do you see him as a model of a leader here in the Middle East?
He has really taken to heart the ideal of religious freedom, and he's done so with great power and great courage, and he is to be lauded for that.
And one final domestic question, BDS, there's an act proposed right now in the Senate. It's not being passed because Democrats are refusing to vote for it. It was by Senator Rubio. What's your position on that?
You know, the good news is I don't do politics anymore, U.S. domestic politics, but I'll say this. Israel, too, ought to have the respect and dignity that comes with that great democracy here in the Middle East as well.
Mr. Secretary, thank you very much.
Great. Thank you very much, sir.
Okay.
You have a good day.
You too.
Up next, National Security Advisor John Bolton blasted by Turkey, welcomed in Israel. Just before Pompeo's visit to U.S. Arab allies in the region, National Security Advisor John Bolton met with two other U.S. allies, Turkey and Israel. But Turkey's president refused to meet him. And he had 2 hours of tough talks with Turkish officials over arrangements for the U.S. pullout of troops in Syria and any future involvement there. Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan publicly blasted U.S. National Security Advisor John Bolton in front of the parliament.
It's not possible for us to accept, to swallow the message John Bolton gave from Israel.
Bolton is visiting the region to assure allies that the U.S. is not abandoning them. While visiting Jerusalem, he said defending Israel and other allies who fought against ISIS was guaranteed. He wanted assurances from Turkey that they would not harm the Kurds.
John Bolton has made a very serious mistake. Whoever thinks like this is also mistaken. We can't make any concessions in this regard, and those involved in a terror corridor will receive the necessary punishment.
On CBN's Faith Nation program, Chief International Correspondent Gary Lane said everyone is vying for power.
Everyone is jockeying for position in Syria at this time because the war is winding down. ISIS has pretty much been defeated, so have other militant groups.
Initially, President Trump said he would pull 2,000 U.S. troops out of Syria within 30 days. But after strong objection from Middle East allies and others, he's backed down. We will be leaving at a proper pace while at the same time continuing to fight ISIS and doing all else that is prudent and necessary. But Lane said there's a lot of concern over leaving Turkey in charge.
The Kurds are wondering, are you a reliable ally, United States, if you withdraw these troops and the training that we've received, that buffer, that help that we've received over time in the last couple of years, where are we going to be? And where are the Christians going to be?
But senior Kurdish official Badran Jia Kurd said the Kurds haven't heard directly from the U.S., only through the media.
We're waiting for clarification from the U.S. administration regarding these statements. This shows that the U.S. has a plan in this direction, but it's not clear to us. But now there is a reality that Bolton acknowledged that Turkey is killing the Kurds and are annihilating them, and Bolton wants guarantees.
Turkey has fought the Kurds for decades. Erdogan said it's a lie that Turkey would target the Kurds in Syria, but said the military preparations to attack what he calls Kurdish terror groups are nearly complete. It's not clear how Erdogan's declaration will affect the pullout, but for now it appears that U.S. troops aren't going anywhere. National Security Advisor John Bolton also visited Israel to calm fears about the U.S. pullout of troops from Syria, and he heard that Iran is Israel's biggest concern. CBN News Middle East correspondent Julie Stahl has that story.
U.S. National Security Advisor John Bolton met with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu.
Prime Minister, under your leadership with President Trump, we now have the best U.S.-Israel relationship in our history. On our side, we're certainly determined to continue that.
Bolton arrived against the backdrop of President Trump's decision to pull 2,000 U.S. troops out of Syria.
Right on your border, we have the problem of the conflict in Syria. We're going to be discussing the president's decision to withdraw, but to do so from northeast Syria in a way that makes sure that ISIS is defeated and is not able to revive itself and become a threat again.
The announcement created concern in Israel and fear among U.S. ally, the Kurds, who have fought against ISIS. But Bolton said the U.S. would take care of its friends.
And to make sure that the defense of Israel and our other friends in the region is absolutely assured. And to take care of those who have fought with us against ISIS and other terrorist groups.
Netanyahu thanked Bolton for President Trump's support for Israel and offered to show him Israel's northern border with Syria along the Golan Heights.
The Golan Heights is tremendously important for our security, and I think that when you're there, you'll be able to understand perfectly why we'll never leave the Golan Heights and why it's important that all countries recognize Israel's sovereignty over the Golan Heights.
Israel captured the Golan Plateau during the last 2 days of the 1967 Six-Day War. Now, Iran is trying to take up positions along that border.
Iran has ambitions to build a huge, I would call it a highway, across Syria and across Iraq so that it can move troops from the Iranian border into Syria, towards Lebanon and the Golan Heights.
Former Israeli ambassador to the UN, Dori Gold, says that's not good for Israel.
Israel is concerned that this pullout could open the corridor that the Iranians so desperately want to build.
For now, the pullout seems to be on hold, but Israel and the region are waiting to see what President Trump's next move will be. Julie Stahl, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Coming up, author Joel Rosenberg talks about Pompeo's message and what impact it will have on the Middle East. Best-selling author and Middle East analyst Joel Rosenberg was also here in Cairo to hear U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo's major address. I talked with Rosenberg about what this will mean for the Middle East. Joel, today was a major speech by the Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. We were there at the church as well, the church that President el-Sisi built for the Coptic Church. What is your analysis right now of the speech itself?
I couldn't have asked Secretary Pompeo to give a more powerful, encouraging statement that President Sisi and the government of Egypt is doing so much for religious freedom. It really is a message not just to Egypt, but to Muslims all over North Africa and the Middle East. I mean, from the beginning of his speech, he noted that he himself is an evangelical Christian and how special it is to be here in Egypt to honor, in many ways, the Islamic government of Egypt to build this church and give it as a gift to the Christians.
And you and I were there at the dedication just a few days ago, and that really, as you said that night, it was really historic. And he was making a point that he actually visited there at the church.
Absolutely. Look, you have President Trump tweeting out congratulations to President Sisi and the people of Egypt for building a more inclusive country. That was important language. And for the Secretary of State to come here just a few days after the dedication of the church, and to, it's one thing to say it in a speech, hey, that was good, this promotes religious freedom, but to actually take the time on a 9-country trip to go and actually visit the church and the mosque, I thought sent a very powerful statement that the Trump administration and Secretary Pompeo himself believes this is a big deal. It's a big deal. I'm not sure that all the media is treating it like a big deal, but it is a huge deal, and it's about the inclusiveness and peace and cooperation between Muslims and Christians that we have not seen in this part of the world nearly enough.
One of the themes in the speech, and I know on the trip, is the fact that he's trying to align countries against what he calls this nefarious influence of Iran here in the Middle East.
Right.
And you see, actually, two kind of axes lining up.
Right.
I mean, those for and against Iran.
Right. Well, in this new novel that I'm writing that's coming out in March, The Persian Gamble, it's about the Iranians secretly trying to buy nuclear weapons, even while they're supposedly maintaining the Iran nuclear deal that President Obama completed with them. Look, you really have a situation where the region of the Middle East and North Africa is getting the threat of Iran far more than Europe does. This is interesting that we are having more trouble with our European allies than we are with our Arab Middle Eastern allies. The Arabs, they get it. Because they're close to it. They see the threat that Iran wants to build an Islamic empire. And they are hell-bent on acquiring nuclear weapons one way or the other. I thought Pompeo's speech was particularly good because he made challenging Iran the centerpiece, which is such a stark contrast from the previous administration, which thought that Iran was somehow some player that could, play well with other children in the sandbox. They can't, not under this current regime in Tehran.
And what countries do you see building alliances here in the Middle East on one side and the other?
Yeah, well, on the negative side, you've got Russia building an alliance with Iran, with Turkey. This is a serious problem. Turkey being particularly concerning because it is a NATO ally, and yet they are not acting like an ally. They're building an alliance with Russia and Iran. Not good. On the other side, what do you have? You have the United States building an alliance with Israel, with Egypt, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and other Gulf states against the threat posed by Iran. These two sides are forming. I would say they're not fully formed alliances, but you've got basically a Western alliance that's the positive one, led by the U.S., and then you've got the Eastern alliance with Russia, Iran, and Turkey, which is, I think, really bodes ill, the danger for the United States and our allies.
Yeah, and finally, Joel, how can people be praying about what's going on in the Middle East? Because it affects...
The Christians here in Egypt are very encouraged. Yes, they've got huge problems. It's a country that's trying to make a lot of changes. But we met with 36 senior Egyptian Christian leaders, Orthodox and Protestant. They're feeling encouraged. They're seeing their president fighting terrorism, fighting extremism, and building the biggest church in the Middle East. And they're encouraged. And as we've traveled in the region as evangelicals, we're hearing other Christian communities feeling encouraged. But there is, it's the Middle East. Bad things have happened. Bad things will continue to happen. So we've got to stand with our Christian brothers and sisters. But also we've got to pray that this alliance on the good guy side between Israel, Egypt, Jordan, Saudi, the Emiratis, the Gulf states, and the United States at the lead, that this really solidifies. Because if that happens, lots of good can come of it.
Well, Joe, we'll be praying, and thanks for your analysis, and also what you've been doing here in the Middle East as well to bring about some of this reconciliation. Still ahead, Muslim Egyptian President El-Sisi dedicates one of the largest churches in the Middle East. Christians in Egypt celebrated the birth of Jesus Christ in January. Christmas 2019 will be remembered for the dedication of the largest church in the Middle East. Take a look. At Christmas Mass, Egypt's Coptic Pope inaugurated the Nativity of the Christ Cathedral, with the president joining the celebration. The building is a gift to the church from Egypt's President El-Sisi. He commissioned the construction of the cathedral in 2017 to be part of the new administrative capital outside of Cairo. And he said he wanted the church, the new church, to be a message of peace and love to the world. Joel Rosenberg led a delegation of evangelicals here for the dedication.
I think what we've seen here is historic. I really think it's a game changer that a Sunni Arab Muslim president of the world's largest Arab country has built a church the largest in the Middle East, and given as a gift to the Christians of Egypt. We've never seen anything like it in all of history, and I think President Sisi is sending a message not just to his own people, but to all Muslims. Muslims and Christians can live in unity and coexistence. That's an extraordinary development.
In a tweet, President Trump praised El-Sisi for moving his country to a more inclusive future. Johnny Moore agrees, seeing him leading a new spirit movement in the Middle East.
You know, there's a verse in the Bible, that says what the enemy meant for evil, God uses for good. And the horrific terrorism of the last decade, at its height in 2014 and 2015 with ISIS, what it has done is it has created fertile ground for a new spirit of tolerance to rise across the region, and you have leaders who are facilitating that.
Reverend Andrea Zaki, president of the Protestant churches here, says the Egypt portrayed in the media is not the whole story.
I think Egypt is moving. Changes is not like a computer. Click, you have a new screen in a second. Culture, customs, nations, economy, all of these are taking long time, but you can feel and see and touch the changes.
The group also met with Pope Tadros, the head of the largest Christian church in the Middle East, and with evangelical leaders. They shared the same story.
And the answer that they give us time and time again repeatedly is we have challenges, but the situation is so much better than it was under Sadat, under Mubarak, under the Muslim Brotherhood for sure. We're encouraged, but we're going to keep pressing for even more change.
Well, that's all for this edition of Jerusalem Dateline, coming to you this week from Cairo. Remember to pray for leaders in the region like U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo for wisdom and for protection for many of the Christians here in the region at this critical time. Well, thanks for joining us. Remember, you can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. I'm Chris Mitchell. We'll see you next time on Jerusalem Dateline.